Hello, thanks for joining us. I'm going to introduce our next guest now. We're very fortunate to have her with us today. Kelly Clements, she's the Deputy High Commissioner for the UN High Commissioner for Refugees Office, former U.S. Government official in the State Department dealing with these same issues. And we're happy to have her because we have very limited time. So let's get moving. So let's get going. All right, we have a seat here. Let's see if I have here. Okay, let's talk about money. So I think that for UNHCR, that your appeal this year was for about $10 billion to do all the work that you want to do. We're now well into September. My understanding is that have you gotten half of that, or did you get a fraction of that? And I'm curious, what that means. We see over the years appeals are never fully subscribed to and people seem to be able to do their work, but is there something in the air now which indicates that this is going to be harder and harder?
Yeah, thank you very much, Colum, and greetings to everybody. It's lovely to be with you this afternoon. Yes, indeed, humanitarian needs are increasing. Our budget is actually now, with supplementary appeals, closing in on $11 billion. And as of now, the resources coming in are just less than 40%. And we do something a little bit differently than other sister agencies. We have a needs-based budget. So what we put out to the world is what we think that refugees and their host communities, internally displaced, and others that we serve need actually to be able to not just to survive but also to thrive. So there are a lot of components to our budget. But yeah, it's a difficult year, and we've seen a bit I think the ripple effect of Ukraine. We had quite a banner year last year in terms of fundraising generally, including from the private sector. We've been trying to solidify that support and really make the case for the forcibly displaced all over the world in other aspects as well. We had private sector stepping forward, individual giving. About 20% of our budget last year was from the private sector. So we see also a little bit more on the private sector than public givers. But this is a huge concern for us in terms of being able to try to meet those needs, given the host countries and the refugees and others that depend on this kind of support.
Right. So, do you just have to learn how to operate with less, or are you operating with less? Is it worse than it was 5 years ago?
I would say it is worse because the needs are much higher. We had some discussions not too long ago about what's happening, why the numbness, why not the outpouring of support this year, given that in multiple parts of the world, we still see the situation worsen. And the most recent, of course, is Sudan. 5 million people, 4 million internally displaced, 1 million refugees. This really comes at a cost. The words that I heard used to describe how we're describing impact from an underfunded operation is white noise. Now, that, of course, to a humanitarian kicks you in the gut. So how do you demonstrate impact? What do we do, Colum? It's a whole variety of issues. It means that critical programming, for example, getting refugee kids in school, being able to support hosts that are strained, gender-based violence prevention and response, issues related to just the basics. Right now, on the emergency side, we have an emergency on average every 2 weeks. Right. That's how much we're dependent on that kind of support. But because these refugee and internally displaced, forced displacement situations go on for a very long time, they're protracted. Those are the situations that don't get the notice, that don't get the attention, but still have the needs.
So, for instance, Libya and the response, you will get money for that. And then for long-term, more chronic issues, it starts to fall off at a certain point.
Yeah, look at what happened recently with regard to the earthquake in Turkey and Syria. Right. I was actually in Syria, in Iraq, as the earthquake hit. There was a lot of support for both Turkey as well as Syria in those initial days. It was a natural disaster. We've had those conversations before in terms of that gets the immediate response, but these are long-term requirements that don't get sustained support. Mm-hmm. Same will be the case in Libya.
Right.
Sure of it.
Now, you mentioned the 20% from the private sector. What has the trajectory been? Everybody's talking about private sector has got to really fill the gap. Not clear that they will, but what has the trajectory been over the last few years? And also, is it really going? I mean, are you going to have to rely increasingly on the private sector, and also are states using the private sector as an excuse not to give, to say you need to do more to get money from the private sector?
So where we're talking a little bit differently, perhaps from other sister agencies, is the Global Compact on Refugees was about a whole of society approach.
Right.
Civil society, importantly, refugees and displaced right at the center, governments, public, and private. And for businesses, this is not check writing charity. For the private sector, it's about expertise. Importantly, for refugees that tend to be more demonized and polarized in terms of this context, very fraught political context that we're working with, this becomes something where we need strong advocates to say, if you include refugees in society, they are a boom to those communities that they're thriving economically. Businesses see this. It's a win-win. They have a potential business base, but they also are doing good in the world.
Right. So I'm going to read a list of the underfunded programs in 2022. Bangladesh, Chad, Colombia, Democratic Republic of Congo, Ethiopia, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, South Sudan, Uganda, and Yemen. So who's missing from that list? Ukraine. And is that sort of indication that Ukraine has been fully funded, or is there any reason they're not on the list? And also that just gets to sort of the broader debate that we're seeing at the General Assembly. The question is, too much of the donor community, the US and the Europeans, focused on Ukraine and not enough on the rest of the world. And you see those names, and it's striking that Ukraine is one of the biggest refugee crises for you. And is it just that it's fresh enough, it's in the early enough stages that funding, that funders have not become fatigued, or does it really, does it reflect the kinds of things that people in the global South have been saying, that Ukraine gets special treatment because it's in Europe?
I should say, Colum, that we're in 135 countries, so there are a lot of countries not on that list.
Right.
Ukrainians still need support, but other parts of the world need it more desperately right now. And what we've seen, I think, in terms of that, I wouldn't say it was an offset, because there was additional support that came because of that response. The challenge for us and other humanitarians and other development partners is, how do you sustain the support over the long term, including from the private sector? It's one of the reasons why the Ukraine response has been so different, which is what we'd like to see in other refugee contexts. The European Union put a temporary protection directive in place within days of that outflow coming in. Like you said, it was record levels. This is what we'd like to see in other refugee situations, where people can work, where they can put their kids in school, where they can access health services, where you don't have parallel humanitarian responses that are more costly, and where you still need to have support for the host communities. That's the sort of thing that's happening now. So for the Ukraine response for UNHCR, we're actually, because Europe has stepped up and been able to provide this support, with the exception of Moldova, where we maintain a slightly larger program, we can kind of consolidate some of those operations and focus on where the displacement is more urgent, which is inside the country. And so that continues. But yes, there has been an impact, certainly.
Right. I'm going to throw in an AI question. So you have the big drivers of flight, refugees leaving: climate, conflict, economic issues, stress that is in some way related to the other two issues. I know that UNHCR has been engaged in some experimental work with AI and predictive analysis, the Jetson project, and that sort of thing. I mean, are you guys learning anything from that? Is it making any difference? Are you able to better predict the refugee flows as a result of this? Is it too early, or is it really happening?
Well, it's complex, as you've just mentioned. Cost of living, we talk about it as the 3 C's: conflict, climate, cost of living, the impacts of COVID, maybe 4 C's.
Right.
But yes, predictive analytics and bringing back the private sector, we could not have done that without academia and business to help us with that. I think we're getting better at it in terms of early warning, but there are some things that are unpredictable. The political behavior, the political attitude, what states decide to do when they can't come to the table and find a resolution. That AI doesn't really help us all that much. Mm-hmm. But I think we have a much more sophisticated way of seeing with the weather patterns, with community resilience or lack thereof,
Right.
where we could see the next movement of people.
But like 5, 10 years ago, was climate, I mean, it was still on your radar, but I mean, is it really kind of become the central issue that you're confronting in terms of predicting, refugee flows?
Well, since you have something in the neighborhood of 70% of refugees and internally displaced being in those areas of climate vulnerability,
Right.
9 out of 10 refugees that are returning to countries in climate vulnerability. We have to equip ourselves, both in terms of operational delivery, also the way that we actually deliver as a UN and with all the incredible partners we have around the globe, and looking at this also from the law and policy end. So yes,
Right.
climate is a huge driver of what we're doing now, including on displacement.
Right, great. So the clock is telling me we have to go, unfortunately, but we really appreciate your coming and speaking to us. I wish we had more time.
Thank you,
It's a very
Colum.
quick
Thanks, everybody.
session.